Boldwood presents It All Started With You, written by Debbie Howells and read by Helen Phillips. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. It all began with a bossy friend and a small word. 2 letters, rhymes with Joe. But no matter what's in my head, what comes out is always yes. And in the case of the well-meaning, about-to-be-married friend whose florist let her down at the last minute, it didn't matter I'd never put together a bouquet, let alone worked as a florist. My fate was sealed. Honey has a lot to answer for, but as I soon discovered, there's something seductive about flowers. Not just the luscious scents and vibrant colours, but it's the symbolism, the hidden sentiment, the love, passion and beseeching, artistically arranged and gift-wrapped in crunchy brown paper. The ultimate gesture of romance, but so much more. I'd always loved flowers, but, put simply, being a wedding florist was an accident. It just happened. But then that's the story of my life. It can't be that hard. Honey begged me. Actually begged rather than ordered, which wasn't honey-like at all. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Plus, she'd morphed into a hideous bridezilla by then. It's to be expected, I've learned since. Only some are worse than others. And honey never does things by halves. Fricking woman's let me down. You're creative, aren't you? And it's just plonking a bunch of flowers in a vase. Please, Frankie. Please. I'll pay you. She mentioned a sum that would keep my bank manager off my back a little longer. Otherwise, it'll be the most miserable wedding ever. Not for nothing is Honey a successful lawyer. Though put on the spot, I always forget this. She had me cornered, and she knew it. I thought about it, but not for long. Only the hardest-hearted person could bear their best friend's big day to be anything less than perfect. And if I'm honest, a tiny, insecure part of me liked the idea that just for once, I could do something she couldn't. Before I knew it, I'd muttered those immortal words. I suppose so. At which point, she'd whooped triumphantly and flung her arms round me, leaving me spluttering in a cloud of Chanel. If only I'd stopped to think, even fleetingly, that this was a wedding. Worse, it was Honey's wedding, and no matter how hard I wanted to trivialize it, I wouldn't be able to, because make no mistake, it mattered. Try taking your worst nightmare and multiplying it 100-fold, because as I've learned since, with weddings, there are no second chances. No saying, it's okay, we'll sort it out tomorrow. Everything has to be perfect, on the day. This wedding brought out the very worst in my friend. But as well as manipulative, she's a control freak. Finding the right flowers in precisely the right colours and degree of openness kept me awake at night. Imagine, sleepless nights over bunches of flowers. It's about as insane as the bride who measures the diameter of roses. And believe me, Honey did that, just as she insisted they match the bridesmaids' dresses, which were a washed-out, grubby shade of lilac. Antique, I was told, sternly, as I stared in horror at the fabric swatch she waved in front of me. Did flowers that colour even exist? When I expressed my concerns, Honey was dismissive. Look online. It can't be difficult to find them. Whatever, I thought. And it wasn't just plonking things in vases either. Oh no, there were 15 of them, to be all identically just so, and exactly like the picture she gave me, with sticky out bits and twiddly things. This was honey, after all. Not to mention the small matter of the church. Just pretty it up a bit, Frankie. I'll leave it to you. Only can you make sure you do the windowsills, and a big thingy by the altar, and pew ends, and confetti cones with real rose petals, and... Pew ends, shmoo ends. I didn't know how to make them back then, so I tied bunches of flowers on with long trails of ribbon. It was pretty, but if I'd known then what I know now, I'd have sneaked lavender in there for constancy, and exquisite stars of stephanotis for a long and happy marriage, and hazel twigs, of course, because no wedding's complete without them. But then, none of this mattered, because hazel twigs or not, it was a romantic, magical day, as all weddings should be, with honey dazzlingly adorned in Caroline Castigliano, her beloved Johnny on her arm, and a scattering of tiny bridesmaids following behind. And as I eavesdropped shamelessly on the many admiring comments, I couldn't help but feel a small, secret glow of pride that a tiny part of this was all mine. As it turns out, Honey loved what I'd done so much that when my latest job collapsed in tatters around me, fresh back from honeymoon, she came to see me. Tanned and glowing after a fortnight in the Caribbean, Bridezilla had gone, and my old friend, the ball-busting lawyer, was back. You can't seriously have thought you'd spend the rest of your days being a waitress. I mean, really. Of course, I'd seriously thought no such thing. I just needed money and took the first job that came along. She stared disbelievingly at me. Frankie, we've known each other for years, haven't we? In all that time, the longest you've stuck at any one thing is about, 8 months? More like 6, I told her miserably, feeling a pit of despair open up in front of me. At times, she really could be brutal. It's time for a change, don't you think? Take something seriously for once? Easy for her to say. I sighed. I knew what she was doing. Honey's philosophy with everyone, friends included, is to break them down, to build them up. Sympathy doesn't come into it. Naturally, I didn't argue. I get by, and it's not like I don't try, I objected, trying to justify myself. Really, I do. It's just, well, you have to agree, I am quite unlucky. But as I topped up her glass of Pinot Grigio, even I knew how lame that sounded. Thank you. Well, go on a course. Get a qualification. But get off your arse and do something, or you'll be squatting in this flat of yours forever. That last bit needled me, because I love living here. Dexter's Green is one of those picture postcard villages, consisting of a handful of pretty old cottages which are home to an assortment of equally colourful residents, with the ubiquitous village pub and the most lethal cider for miles, and Demels's, handy for emergency supplies of chocolate and not much else. My flat's tucked away above the post office, with a front door off a quiet road and a personality all of its own. The ceilings are crooked, and part of the floor creaks ominously. And if it rains overnight, the roof leaks. But the views are to die for, and it's cheap. Suddenly Honey leaped up, looking delighted with herself. Frankie, I've got it. Flowers. You did mine, didn't you? Go back to college and learn to be a proper florist. I'll write you a testimonial if you need one. As if my future could be decided as simply as that. But Honey likes to channel her bossiness into worthy causes, and as true friends always do, she had my best interests at heart. Over the years I'd resisted her attempts to interfere, but this time I had to concede. She had a point. I'd worked in coffee shops and care homes and garden centres, which meant I scraped by, but only just. Part of me craved more. Why shouldn't I have a flashy car and expensive clothes, instead of simply admiring those everyone else had? I pictured my own neat little house, the mortgage paid each month on the button, instead of muddling along struggling to pay my rent. The long and short of it was, she got me thinking, because somewhere along the way, I'd missed that elusive something that all my friends had figured out. There was a future out there. I was sure of it. No less, no more than anyone else's. And I'd wasted enough time taking the path of least resistance while I waited for life to happen. It was as a glimmer of an idea was taking seed that one gloriously sunny morning, a few days later, I was walking around All Hallows, a town about 5 miles away, window shopping, because it was the only kind of shopping I could afford. Then, as I turned up a cobbled side street, right at the end, I saw it. The most humble of florists, called Daisy Chain. If I'd have known then what I know now, I'd have probably carried on walking. You see, there are florists, and there are florists, about as many worlds apart as McDonald's and the Dorchester. However, this was then, and without a second thought, I went in. Okay, so it wasn't the Dorchester, but it was a proper old-fashioned florist shop, and actually, it was sweet in there, with lots of traditional flowers like carnations and chrysanthemums, and frothy white clouds of gypsophila. Of course, there were tasteless add-ons and plastic tat in abundance, but then a short, rotund figure popped up amongst the buckets. Her salt and pepper hair stuck out at shoulder length. It was my first glimpse of Mrs. Orange. "Can I help you, Pat?" "I don't know, I'm looking for a job. You see, I want to learn to be a florist." My earlier confidence seemed to wither up and die as her beady eyes scrutinized me. "Work experience, duck?" she said, raising an eyebrow, which I took to be encouraging. At least it wasn't a straight no. Well, sort of," I said, "but I do need paying," which was a bit cheeky, considering. She made a strange sound, chaw, chaw, with one eye squinting at me. And then I noticed the hands poking out of her shirt sleeves. They were shriveled looking and dry. Old hands. It didn't put me off. "You can have a trial, my lovely. 1 week. I ain't paying you for it, mind. But if you turn out to be useful, we'll see. Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp." I was in no position to argue. Anyway, as I saw it, this was my chance. I danced out of her shop and made for the library, where I picked up as many books as I could carry on flowers for the home, from round the world, tedious textbooks and gloriously photographed coffee table books, getting some funny looks from the librarian as I piled them onto the desk. "I'm training," I told her, needing to share it with someone before I burst with excitement. "My new career. I'm going to be a florist." Completely missing the nervous looks they exchanged as I staggered out carrying them all. But as soon as I was home, I started reading. As I flicked through page after colourful page, immersing myself in this glorious new world, I completely lost track of time. Forget floristry. This was art. The only trouble was, the more I read, the more I realised there were 1 or 2 little things I needed to learn along the way. So the very next day found me sitting at my kitchen table with a bunch of Tesco's cheapest and a textbook. Cursing and swearing and stabbing my fingers, I learned to wire flower heads and invisibly thread leaves so they hold their shape, wondering if I'd ever be brave enough to demonstrate this to the mighty Mrs. Orange. I was beginning to think that perhaps I'd found my calling, or maybe it was sheer desperation at embarking, yet again, on something completely new. But this time, I was fueled with determination. Those first days in the shop, in that rite of passage that belonged to all fledgling florists, I scrubbed endless numbers of buckets and swept thousands of petals off the floor. Mrs. Orange watched me like a hawk and pulled me up on almost everything, but she must have seen a shred of something in me. At the end of the week, I waited with bated breath. "Suppose I'll be seeing you on Monday, my lovely," was all she said. I was tired and more broke than I ever remember being, but it was a magical fairy tale moment. All I could think was, I've done it. Slightly disbelieving as her words sank in, a wave of euphoria washed over me. At last I was on my way to a proper career, and gradually, after months of slaving away, making old-fashioned bouquets and sympathy flowers, my confidence grew. Enough to cockily suggest she should change the name of her shop to Orange Blossom and try to attract more weddings. I'd been daydreaming about how we could draw in the rich and famous from miles around, becoming the florist from whom everyone who was anyone bought their flowers. But Mrs. Orange had no such inclination. "Daisy chain's done me fine." Putting me firmly in my place, in her next breath, she knocked me sideways. "And I can't be doing with any more of them brides. Trouble, the lot of 'em. Anyway, my lovely, what with me retiring next month, it ain't worth it." At which point, I gasped in horror. I couldn't believe this was happening. Again, just as I'd found my feet, the floor was being whipped away from under them. But I could hardly blame her. At 73, she was looking forward to selling up and finishing with flowers for good. "I've done with them earlies, my lovely, and me poor hands." I could see her point, and I had to agree about the hands. They were shocking. But it was a sad day when she closed. The end of an era, and the end of my dream. Her most loyal customers flocked in that evening to drink warm kava and wish her well. And for me, it was back to square one. Or so I thought, as I slipped out of the shop for the last time. But I'd reckoned without Honey's interfering ways, and as I wandered home dejectedly, wondering what on earth I was going to do next, my mobile rang in my pocket. She had another of her ideas. But this time, as it happened, a really good one. Chapter 2. Starting up on my own was something I hadn't considered, but the following evening, when Honey took me to see the building she had in mind, I felt the faintest flutter of excitement. Just a few minutes' walk from my flat, it was, well, scruffy. A blink and you'll miss it kind of place, tagged on the end of someone's barn. But with weathered timbers and thick, whitewashed walls to keep the most delicate of flowers cool in summer. Honey stepped inside and turned up her nose at it. But then her idea of stylish was modern and minimal, with granite worktops. To me, quite simply, it was perfect. As I walked slowly around, touching the cool stone of the walls and feeling the breeze whisper in through the door, a picture stole into my head. Of every corner crammed with flowers, with colour. The air heady with their scents. Of wedding photos covering the wall, a big painted sign outside, and me inside, creating sublime bouquets for a host of grateful, admiring clients. But the picture faded just as quickly. How could I, Frankie Valentine, actually do this? I'd never organised anything in my life, and even if I dared to think I could, there was one teensy little problem. If I were brave enough, I told her, which I'm not, it would be perfect, honey. It really would. But there's one teeny little problem. Nonsense, she said. I'll cover the deposit. You can't, I told her, horrified and excited at the same time. Think of it as payback for my wedding flowers, Honey had said firmly. For all her bossiness, she's also incredibly generous. But you paid me. Not enough. And you got me out of a fix. Just bring me a bouquet every week. Suddenly I really wanted this. Far too much to let it pass me by. It happened like lightning after that. Honey saw it. She arranged the opening party too, complete with champagne and the local press in attendance, who printed a photo of me looking rather squiffy. But she made it clear too, that this is my shop. And she's as good as her word. Mostly she stays out of it, though every so often she can't help herself. You need to ditch that mad old bat, she told me shortly after I opened. Seriously, Frankie, she'll put your customers off. It's that stare. I knew what she meant, but Mrs. Orange reserves her most evil glare for Honey, who's too posh and outspoken for her liking. But we agreed, it's my shop. And she did teach me everything I know. I said stubbornly, sorry, I want her to stay. So Mrs. Orange continues to pop in and out when she feels like it, and spies on my brides from across the road while she gossips to Mr. Crowley and Demels's. Every so often, she imparts gems of doom like, that young couple, that carroty one and the skinny lad, it won't last. You mark my words, you can tell. I hope you're wrong, I told her, horrified. They've just ordered a ton of flowers and paid me a lovely fat deposit. I'm absolutely sure they're serious. Don't mean nothing, girl. When are you going to learn? With Mrs. Orange clucking in the background, I took the plunge. So much for her retiring. Once I was up and running, she couldn't stay away. And so 3 years later, I'm still here. Welcome to my world. It's the small converted cowshed on the edge of Dexter's Green, with a hand-painted pink and white sign outside, Valentine's flowers, next to an old water trough, overflowing with daisies. The stable doors are tatty, the brick floor uneven, which means the buckets tip over, and there's virtually no passing trade. But that's not why I'm here. You see, things have moved on. It just so happens the sun is shining. I'm slap bang in the middle of wedding country, and my accidental business is positively booming. It was entirely a stroke of luck, but I've discovered, since opening, that brides travel miles to get married in one of the many barns or country houses within a radius of here. There's even a real live castle, complete with portcullis and dungeons and a headless ghost, the kind of venue many girls dream of, along with the frou-frou dress and the towering cake no one eats. And with my penchant for low-carbon footprint, real seasonal flowers, I too am the latest fashion. None of your Dutch roses or all-year-round gerbras for me. Think instead of an exquisite country garden, the air heavy with the scent of old-fashioned roses and herbs, or in winter, the little white narcissi and hyacinths lighting up the darkest corners. What could be more perfect for that once-in-a-lifetime fairy princess day? You need some hazel with them roses, pet. Mrs. Orange butts in. She'd be a dahlia, if she was a flower. One of those brightly coloured pom-pom ones. Round, loud, and forthright. Good for reconciliation, Hazel is. Pop a bit in, so they don't see it like. It would look lovely, I agree, but it's a wedding bouquet. Not a peace offering, and the client wants just flowers. No leaves, no twigs, no anything else at all. And the client will be livid if she gets them. It's a dummy run for a mega wedding and a complete pain in the arse. Personally, I blame the wedding magazines. Ask your florist to mock up your bouquet in advance. Who came up with that bright idea? Not helpful. Not at all. Especially when said bouquet features spring flowers and your bride wants to see it in November. Now, I'm hoping you're going to tell me that young bride's got black hair, my lovely, and green eyes, I'm thinking. Yes, green, she says firmly, gazing at my flowers. Not entirely blameless in my accidental career. She has some fairly outlandish ideas. And she's completely mad, by the way, in case you hadn't guessed. Yes, Mrs. Orange, as a matter of fact, she has. The hair, I mean. I haven't a clue about the eyes. Now, if you'll excuse me. But she just stands and chuckles as I tear around my shop, my own hair flying all over the place, one eye on the clock as I snatch up roses from the dozens of buckets that fill the floor space. I told you, pet, didn't I, that it's the flowers that choose the bride, not the other way round? Here, you can't go putting those two together. She clucks disapprovingly and tries to take the flowers from me. Chaw, chaw. The florist knows best. That's what I always say. Give her the hazel twigs. She'll come round. I don't think so. I whisk the flowers away from her. She keeps on about it, but I don't buy into all that superstitious nonsense. These are perfect as they are. Anyway, I thought you didn't like weddings. Fortunately, she backs off, as I wind the stems with beautiful hand-woven ribbon. Right on cue, a shiny silver car pulls up. Mrs. Orange stomps over to the door, a short, stumpy figure in layers of clashing clothes, peering nosily outside. You expecting someone important, my lovely? It's one of them real posh jobs, she says loudly over her shoulder. Shh, it's probably my client. Which it is. Sarah Macaulay, the mother of the bride, strides up the steps, squeezing past Mrs. Orange, who comes up to her elbow and refuses to budge from the doorway. I feel a flicker of pride as I glance around. It's gorgeous in here this morning, like an English country garden, crammed into buckets, with tall lilies in various stages of opening amid gracefully arching stems of foliage, with all the smaller buckets filled with delicious-smelling things like roses and lavender and mint. Not that Sarah notices. Morning, Frankie. I'm early. I hope that's all right. She's thin and glamorous, Sarah, in pale cashmere and immaculate white jeans, and smells of Chanel No. 5. But it's her hands and the hair that I notice. She's clearly one of those ladies who have their nails done and their highlights touched up before they need to. Unlike me. My hands are beginning to look like Mrs. Orange's. Mrs. Macaulay, of course. Do come through. I've just finished it. It wouldn't look out of place in a glossy magazine. A soft confection of the most delicate scented roses, contrasting against the rough wood of the workbench. Stems of apricot Paul Ricard, nestled beside ivory Margaret Merrill, with a scent to die for. In between are glimpses of the palest green hydrangea, not too round or symmetrical, though I say so myself. It's perfection. She picks it up. She doesn't rave about it. Clients like Sarah Macaulay rarely do. They discern. She turns it this way and that, studying it closely, feeling the ribbon between her fingers. "I suppose it's what Melissa wants," she says dismissively. "I'll tell her I've seen it. Add it to the bill, will you?" I know for a fact it's exactly what Melissa has in mind. We've spent many hours and countless emails deliberating over precisely which varieties of rose to use. Sarah marches back outside, and through the window, I watch her toss it carelessly onto the back seat of her Mercedes. She didn't even bother to inhale the sublime scent. I wince. That's £150 worth of my favourite roses. Tossed. Mrs. Orange might be a bit of a fixture, but she doesn't actually do any work. Just pitches up when she's got nothing better to do, now and then, divulging pearls of wisdom as the mood takes her. So I ended up advertising for an assistant. After 9 interviews that were as painful as extracting teeth, Skye was number 10, and the only one with a modicum of creativity. She wears odd clothes, like today's purple camisole, with enormous army surplus trousers held up by men's braces, and the DMs she wears with everything. But she's a hard worker, though more than a little flaky at the best of times. "D'you think?" she says absent-mindedly, screwing up her face and peering through her round glasses at the particularly vicious roses she's dethorning. "We'll ever get any celebrities coming in? Only it would be cool, wouldn't it, Frankie, to do like flowers, like for someone really famous, like that fit bloke from Love Island." I have no idea who she's talking about, but she really does say "like" that many times, aspiring also to the giddy heights of creating a wedding bouquet for someone off some naff reality TV show. If ever they darken our doorstep, she can have them. Everyone's wedding is their big day, I remind her. Fame doesn't come into it. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, because I've far from given up on the idea of fame and fortune. In fact, quite the contrary. Imagining a doorway into a world that's so different to my own, I too have this dream of being a celebrity florist. Chapter 3. Frankie, dinner on Friday. Honey never asks. She orders. I dread to think how she talks to her clients. Her husband Johnny, however, loves her enough to put up with it, which is just as well. And she's a wonderful friend, in small doses. Only now I have a small, thriving business. Honey's onto the other part of my life she likes to stick her nose into, my love life. Her mission being to find me a boyfriend. As I keep reminding her, I have Greg, but that's not good enough for Honey. Right from the start, she told me I was wasting my time. "He's emotionally stunted, Frankie. Unreliable." "You only say that because he's not like Johnny," I objected. It's true. They're polar opposites. Greg just has all these friends he hangs out with. And truly, Honey, if he was at mine all the time, you know me, I'd hate it. But as I spoke, I crossed my fingers. When there was more than a grain of truth in her words, I'd no idea why I was defending him. "You're completely missing the point. It's how he expects you to be there when he wants you, at his beck and call. But in between times, he does what the hell he likes. He just snaps his fingers, Frankie, and you drop everything. I've seen you." "I don't," I protest, uncomfortably, wishing she didn't have to always say it like it is, and grateful at least that she doesn't dredge up the subject of my instinct for complicated men. We all know the type. Oh my days, we can't resist them. The more screwed up, the better. And though we kill ourselves trying, deep down, we know they'll never change. Greg, I'm pleased to say, isn't one. He has no emotional complications whatsoever. He's just casual. And though our fling has its merits, a secret part of me likes to imagine that somewhere out there is a gorgeous specimen of a man, an uncomplicated one, obviously, for whom I'm the only girl in the world. It's a big world, though, I'm finding, and he could be absolutely anywhere. Back to the present. As Greg is going through one of his elusive phases, I decide perhaps I'll go. I'm just wondering who she's pairing me off with this time. So far, there's been Joe, the trainee barrister, who was handsome but far too serious. Patronising too, as I remember. He thinks flowers are a sweet little job for a girl. His words. I was on the verge of reminding him about the super talented mega florist to royalty, Shane Connolly, before slapping him, but decided it wasn't worth the effort. Next up was Alistair, equally good-looking, but newly divorced and heartbroken, definitely in the with baggage category. His sole topic of conversation was his ex and all the personal problems she'd left him with. Way too many hang-ups, even for me. Last time, however, it was bloody gorgeous sex on legs Roscoe. Utterly, jaw-droppingly ravishing, with thick curly hair and the longest eyelashes I've seen except on a cow. For a moment, I'd thought my luck was in, but I soon discovered he clearly has dental hygiene issues, and not only that, he kept feeling me up, under the table, at our first meeting, in front of the other guests. I'd told Honey the next day, when I phoned to thank her for dinner. Dinner was lovely, I said. Really, you excelled yourself, Honey, thank you. Well, was all she said. Oh, Honey, he was fondling me through the char-grilled langoustines, positively groping me all through the bouillabaisse. That was divine, by the way. Really tasty. By the time we got to the clafouti, it wasn't the plums on my plate he was thinking about. One word, though. Listerine. You're so ungrateful, she said huffily. And fussy. Plenty of women would jump on him. Res ipsa loquitur. That, my friend, says it all. I'm not plenty of women, and you're forgetting. I do have Greg. Back to the latest invitation. I quiz her. Who else are you inviting? Honey says, actually Josh, you know, Johnny's brother, and Ryan and Elise. Oh, how lovely. My heart does a backflip, then sinks. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and Elise are a lovely, sweet kind of couple, but they leave you with this nauseating feeling like you've overdosed on schmaltz and need to vomit. Josh, however, happens to be drop-dead gorgeous, in a Zac Efron kind of way. Which swings it. I stop trying to think of excuses. Frankie, are you coming or not? Patience isn't Honey's strong point. Yes, of course I will. Thank you. Not that I dare say no, but on this occasion, I don't want to. In fact, I'm really looking forward to it. You see, we've met before, Josh and I, just the once, at Honey and Johnny's wedding, and I was horribly, squiffily drunk, and I snogged him. Not the greatest start. Still, given that A, he's a bloke, and B, he was probably squiffy too, I'm hopeful he'll have forgotten. And if this time I stay sober and behave impeccably, then just maybe he won't recognise me. But as I hang up, I don't have time to worry about it, because while I was talking to Honey, today's flower order arrived, and after closely examining the contents of all 4 boxes, I have a problem. Shit, I cry, dropping the last box and making Sky jump out of her skin. He's left us the wrong roses. They're cream, not my pinky red ones. I ordered Deep Secret. Oh my God, this is a disaster. What will I do? The bride's mother will refuse to pay, and word will get around, and I'll be out of business before you know it. You won't have a job, I add, to make sure I have her attention. Honestly, this is a nightmare. Chill, Frankie, says Sky. Call Milo. And you know what brides are like. She probably won't even notice. Sometimes I wonder if I missed something, and Sky's colourblind. What? Not notice the difference between pink and white? I think she will, I say fervently, whirling off dervishly, stress puffing like smoke out of my ears. Rummaging through the notes on my desk and flinging them everywhere, eventually I find the phone. For heaven's sake, you need to do something about that stress, Frankie. It's not healthy. Sky stares at me like I'm mad. I feel mad, but this is what weddings do to me. I simply can't bear the thought that the biggest day of someone's life will be ruined because a hapless florist, namely me, messed up. Milo's a marvel. He sources from a whole collection of English growers and coordinates the delivery of most of our flowers, and some. He's tracked down rarer than rare blooms, chased up missing orders, and even fixed a puncture for me. In a crisis, he's been known to perform miracles. Milo, you can't do this to me. I've got the wrong roses. They're not Deep Secret, and I need Deep Secret. You've got to help me. I wail down the phone at him, without pausing for breath. Milo's quite used to hysterical florists. God knows he deals with enough of us. He doesn't turn a hair. I know, darling. He calls us all darling. I'm sure we all believe too, just like I do, that we're his favourite. Drop the wrong box, I did, he says cheerfully. You got iceberg over there, darling. What an Egypt. Don't worry, got your Deep Secret here on the van. He laughs. It's so not funny. I cry distractedly. It's a huge wedding, and they particularly chose the bridesmaids' dresses to match the roses, and I really need them today. Blimey. He sounds amused. But it's true. Some brides actually choose dresses to match flowers, not the other way round. Well, ever so sorry. I'll call by later on. Don't you worry. I put down the phone and slump at my desk, but instantly it rings again. Frankie, it's Lizzie Goff. Double shit. It's Lizzie's roses that are halfway across the country. She sounds upset, even before I tell her. Hi, Lizzie. Your roses have just come in, actually. I break off. Sky's frantically shaking her head at me as she drags her middle finger across her throat. But Lizzie interrupts me. She's a scary girl, Lizzie. A first-degree bridezilla. Oh, Frankie, there's been a disaster. Mummy's little Rolo got hold of one of those dresses. Not mine, thank God. I'd have killed the little bastard. She actually does sound quite murderous. I've met little Rolo, small and cute as Jack Russells are, but with eyes of steel and needle-sharp teeth like a piranha's. I quake in my boots as I think of her roses. I don't wish to be murdered. I'm too young. Complete nightmare. You wouldn't believe. I've been tearing my hair out, and I'm so sorry. And it's so last minute, but we've bought new ones. They're wearing chocolate. Only, do you think that pink roses will still work? Or should we order something different? Or is it too late? Honestly, Frankie, it's completely terrible. What is it about weddings? She sounds as mad as I do. Actually, I say slowly, as a flash of true inspiration strikes. It is awfully late notice, Lizzie, but you're right. It really would be better. I think cream, don't you? It would be perfect with chocolate bridesmaid dresses. Just imagine, little creamy white roses with your mint and lavender like we planned. Oh, Frankie, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. What a stroke of luck. I was so worried. You are sure that's okay? No problem at all, Lizzie. Don't worry about it. We'll see you bright and early on Saturday morning. With my early demise averted, I call Milo and tell him not to worry about the roses, while Skye shakes her head disbelievingly at me. Then the phone rings again. Watch and learn, my friend, I say, feeling smug as I go to answer it. Good morning, Valentine's flowers. It's the call I've waited my whole life for. I'm on an adrenaline-fueled high as I rush home and change in no time into my new skinny jeans with a loose-fitting tunic pulled on over the top, then fly round to Honey's far too early. It's so exciting, I tell her, thrusting the bouquet of white lilies she's expecting into her hands. They symbolise ambition, which she's not exactly short of. But in the past, when I've given her irises, meaning friendship, she wasn't that thrilled. I've gone there early tonight, because if I don't tell someone, I'll burst. As it is, I'm dancing around her kitchen, getting under her feet as she throws together one of her legendary dinners. Coolly elegant in beige linen, not a hair out of place. Maria Bristow's wedding in a castle. I can't believe it. Can you believe it? We'll be famous, honey. We'll have more work than we can cope with. I'll have to expand, employ staff. I'll even pay you back your deposit. Oh, wow, I can't believe it. Frankie Valentine, celebrity florist-to-the-stars.
She's that tart off the telly, isn't she?
Johnny comes in and pours me a glass of champagne. He's what you'd call burly, Johnny, with rugby player shoulders and beefy legs. He's also incredibly laid back, which is a crucial attribute, considering he lives with Honey.
The one with the huge tits and long hair, kind of like a classy Katie Price.
I'd no idea you were so well informed about B-list celebs, says Honey acidly, as she bristles around her state-of-the-art kitchen. She's such a spoilsport. The granite worktops are immaculate. You'd never believe she was actually cooking in here. Oh, Honey. I've forgotten to tell her. Not just B-list. Oh no. I didn't tell you the best bit. She's marrying Pete McNamara. Yay! I'm going to be famous. Pete McNamara is only the lead singer of a world-famous rock band, and I mean world-famous. There's no one who hasn't heard of him, if not always for the right reasons. He has a bit of a reputation, does Pete, for the usual rock star shenanigans, like flinging TVs out of penthouse apartments and throwing wild debauched parties that go on for days. Though rumour has it, he's a changed man since meeting Maria.
Wow, Frankie. Now that is seriously cool.
Johnny agrees. Don't you think it's disgusting? He's old enough to be Maria's father, Honey retorts. And yes, I know, omnia vincit amor. That's exactly what I was going to say. But it's true what they say, isn't it? I think, looking fondly at my friends, love really does conquer all. My good intentions to embrace abstinence and be a model of sobriety remain just that, good intentions. In a celebratory mood, I'm swinging back my third glass of champagne
which on my empty stomach is already going to my head, when I hear a cough coming from behind me. I turn round to see Josh, a little fuzzy round the edges, but every bit as hot as I remember. "Joshy, have some champagne. We're celebrating."
"Hello, everyone. What am I missing?"
He kisses Honey on the cheek, then looks quizzically at all of us.
"Oh, Frankie's got some celebrity client, that's all. B-list. No one that famous,"
says Honey, crushingly, handing him a glass and topping mine up. There's a faint look of interest on his face, and needing little in the way of encouragement, I open my mouth to tell him, but then shut it again, because the very lovely Elise arrives with lovely sensitive Ryan surgically attached to her side. They're so lovely, I think, gazing enviously at how his eyes follow her adoringly, completely forgetting how nauseating all this loveliness is. By the time we sit down at Honey's beautifully set table, I'm already slurring my words. It slipped my mind that I have a 4 o'clock start in the morning, that I need steady hands and a clear head to produce a flawless bouquet for Lizzie and 5 more for her bridesmaids, as well as 20 buttonholes, each with a twiddle of beaded wire. "Now, Josh," I lean towards him and whisper, conspiratorially, enunciating slowly and carefully, between mouthfuls of Honey's risotto, "I really must explain about last time." I give him my best intelligent look, followed by a loud hiccup, which somewhat spoils the effect. He manages to wipe the smile off his face, but it's still there in his eyes. Lovely eyes, I think, feeling my own go a little blurry as my head fills with ludicrous, poetic adjectives. Deep and blue, like the Atlantic, like the sky in July, like a mountainous Hawaiian wave. "Have some water," says Honey firmly, passing me a pint glass. "Drink it, Frankie, all of it, now." Obediently, I take it. But I'm too pissed to register her disapproval, and I'm having far too much fun to stop now. Elise and Ryan nod and smile politely, while Johnny and Josh exchange looks. Josh's shoulders seem to be moving on their own. Not one of them takes my side against her, the cowards. "I think we should sing a little song together." I beam round at them. In full-on party mode, there's no stopping me. There's a stranger in my bed. There's a pounding in my head. I start warbling, and Honey gets up. "Right, that does it, Frankie. You're coming with me." She takes me to their spare room and sits me on the bed, where she does her best to lecture me about how my non-existent self-discipline is the reason I'm stuck with a loser of a boyfriend like Greg, along with my excessive propensity for alcohol. Or maybe it was my propensity for excessive alcohol. I forget. Anyway, I was headed for the queue for a liver transplant if I didn't stop. Plus, I'd ruined her dinner party, not for the first time either, but it was all a complete waste of breath, because as I fall back on the bed, for some reason, my eyes keep closing. And as Honey's voice fades into the distance, that's the last thing I remember. Of course, I oversleep on Saturday morning. Honey comes and wakes me at 7:30 with a cup of tea, much less bossy, in Cath Kidston flower-sprigged pyjamas. "Here, drink this. Oh, and your mobile was making a noise earlier, but I couldn't find it to turn it off." As I ease my head off the pillow, it explodes with pain, just as I remember. God, oh shit, Honey, Lizzie's wedding. While Honey fetches all the analgesics I can safely take in one go, I stagger with my poor head to the bathroom and stick it under the cold tap. Then I borrow her toothbrush. She'd kill me if she finds out, but that's the least of my worries. Still wearing yesterday's clothes, I pull on a pink cardigan I find hanging in her wardrobe before swigging half the tea, burning my mouth in the process, and sprinting out of her house to my van. After the amount of alcohol I consumed last night, I must still be over the limit. My head throbs horribly as I drive, and for a brief moment, my heart's in my mouth as a blue light comes flashing up behind me. Luckily, it's got more urgent matters to attend to than hungover florists, but all I'm thinking is, I'm finished. I've stuffed up, and all because I can't say no to a drink. And of course, when I make it to the shop, Sky and Mrs. Orange are both standing there waiting for me. "What are you thinking?" Sky watches as I fumble to unlock the door. "I've been ringing you for ages. I got here an hour ago. Them bouquets are due to be collected, and we haven't started them. Never mind the buttonholes."
"I'll do your pins for you,"
says Mrs. Orange, using the old-fashioned word for the buttonholes.
"Long as they're not them twiddly ones. I don't do twiddly. Come on now, girl, get a move on."
I love Sky so much, I want to kiss her. I even love Mrs. Orange. Everything's neatly laid out in presentation boxes, just in time, twiddly bits and all. Thanks to the oracle that is Mrs. O, who can do them after all, when she puts her mind to it. The iceberg roses are just beginning to open. Soft, petally blooms, their gentle scent mingling with the mint and lavender. If only flowers could cure my hangover.
"You best have one of these, my lovely."
Mrs. Orange nudges my elbow, fishing in her pocket, and pulling out a peppermint, covered in tiny bits of paper.
"Only, you don't want to go breathing over folks smelling like that. And sort your hair out while you're at it. I'll be putting the kettle on, if you don't mind."
It's my Cinderella moment gone wrong, when at 10 o'clock on the dot, a man walks into the shop. A very nice-looking man, I notice, squinting through clogged eyelashes, regretting last night even more as the analgesics wear off, and my poor head starts to throb again. "Hi, I've, come to pick up the wedding flowers." He gives me a smile, which fades slightly as he looks more closely at my face. "Oh yes, for Lizzie," I say far more brightly than I feel. He's still peering strangely at me.
Yes. And Clive?"
"They're over here." I lead him over to the workbench. Even with my hangover, I notice he's quite gorgeous, with curly dark hair and brown eyes. "Are you Lizzie's family?" I ask, desperately trying to drum up conversation before he disappears out of my life and I never see him again.
"No, best man, actually. This is just one of my duties before I deliver the groom to the church."
"Shit! The church! The freaking pew-hens!" "Oh yes, we're heading there in a bit," I say casually.